Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Tyler, and today I wanted to share my thoughts on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't even know a new Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, as I didn't even know until like a week before it was released. For some reason, this movie had zero marketing or advertising, as putting this video together was the first time I'd even ever seen any of the trailers for the movie. So before we begin, I want to mention two things. Firstly, there will be minor spoilers. I will make sure when I get into spoiler territory I'll say it, but I do keep it very vague so you can decide if you want to skip ahead or watch it. Secondly, to try and improve community interactions with my videos, I plan to answer questions about topics related to whatever I'm discussing letter by letter throughout the video. It will be in a random order, so I'll be unscrambling the letters at the end. Today's question is, who is my favorite horror icon? We're going to start off with the letter T. Starting off with a fun fact, Texas Chainsaw Massacre planned to have a theatrical release sometime in I would assume late 2021, but for unknown reasons it was cut and it ended up solely releasing on Netflix. I tried doing some digging into why the theatrical release was canned, but I came up with nothing. So maybe Netflix outright bought the theatrical release, if that's even possible, or maybe the publishers thought the movie wouldn't perform well enough in theaters so they cut it. I personally have no idea, so if anyone knows what happened, feel free to share it in the comments. So as a sequel to the 1974 original, Texas Chainsaw Massacre sees another round of young adults, this time rich entrepreneurs, disturbing Leatherface as they begin auctioning off the derelict buildings in the town of Harlow. Their plan is to create a new, trendy, gentrified town out of the ashes of the old. Their plans go south quickly when they force who seems to be Leatherface's guardian, an old woman named Guinea, out of the house she claims she still owns. This escalates, and it completely sends Leatherface off the deep end, bringing us another Chainsaw Massacre in Texas. So now that we got the plot out of the way, I wanted to talk about the things I liked in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and then we'll get into some of the things I didn't like. Starting off with the good, Leatherface himself. This movie's portrayal of Leatherface, I will boldly say, is his best portrayal yet. This movie's Leatherface is brutal, smart, and very capable of creating some relatively suspenseful moments. Starting off with his brutality, Leatherface has some pretty brutal kills throughout this movie. Like in the trailer, Leatherface lifts a guy up with his chainsaw, and as awesome as that was, it's not even his best kill. All of the main characters who die in pretty brutal ways. I don't want to spoil how these characters die just because it's some of the most memorable moments throughout the movie, but just take my word for it when I say they are good. While I'm talking about the kills, I wanted to quick give a shout out to the FX team because the gore to these kills I felt seemed pretty spot on. I've never had a chainsaw stuck in me or had my skull bashed in with a hammer, I hope none of you have either, but the amount of blood in these scenes seemed relatively realistic to the blood that would actually come out in real life. I'm sure the major gore fiends are going to be a little disappointed, but I feel that this movie's gore was perfectly matched to its kills. I never really cared for the movies where every wound comes with multiple buckets of blood, because I've always felt that just made the movies way too unrealistic and pulled me out of the experience a little bit. Having a seemingly realistic amount of blood coming out of a wound keeps me more invested as it brings a sort of shock value, as it could be real footage we're watching and not a Hollywood film. Moving on, Leatherface, like I said earlier, seems very seasoned in killing in this installment. He's much smarter and much more handy with his iconic chainsaw and hammer. There's a scene where he revs up his chainsaw and leaves it on the floor as a decoy, and this really threw me off guard because he never seemed like a very smart killer, just someone who would chase you around with a chainsaw. The way the scene played out almost gave me Supernatural vibes too, as fake outs like this are very common in those types of movies. Hearing a noise in the distance, the character checks it out just for no one to be there, but something strange and unexplainable definitely puts the object there. You all know what I'm talking about. In another scene, Leatherface throws his chainsaw on the floor towards a fleeing survivor, successfully cutting up their legs and bringing them down. This really stuck with me because I feel like most of these killers never throw anything, they just kind of chase their victims around until they catch them. I've certainly never seen anyone throw a chainsaw in a movie, so it almost reminded me of something out of a Mortal Kombat game. These moments help to add to the suspense as you truly never know what he was going to do in these tense situations. Speaking of the suspense, Leatherface created some extremely suspenseful scenes. One that really stuck out to me was the segment early on with the character being stuck in a car with Leatherface in the field behind the vehicle. Seeing the character constantly looking through the side mirror, being as quiet as possible, really helped build up the moment where he disappeared from that mirror. There was another segment where a character was stuck in his house as he began getting all of his equipment together to begin his murder spree. She witnesses another character killed right in front of her, and then is spotted trying to escape, turning her quiet escape into a frantic fight for life. This entire scene was so suspenseful, as by this part of the movie it was a little too early to figure out the final survivors, so she could have most certainly died in that moment. Compared to the other horror movie icons hitting theaters lately, None of these characters had me on the edge of my seat quite like this movie's did. I'm not sure if it's because most of the cast in this movie is brand new, so anyone could have died, but I was on the edge of my seat from almost start to finish. So that was my entire positive section. Notice how it was all about Leatherface? He truly was the star of this movie. While I thought his mask looked a little goofy, he really left a memorable impression on me. I hope if this movie gets a sequel, which the ending heavily alludes to, they recast this actor and continue his portrayal down the same road because he was an absolute blast to watch. So now that we talked about the good in the movie, let's talk about the bad, starting off with the characters. So some of the characters certainly get better as the story goes on, but every character fits into a stereotype right off the bat, and most of them never do enough to really shake that stereotype. Starting off with Dante, he came off to me as the type of character who's very greedy and would sacrifice one of his friends to save his own skin. He was without a doubt my least favorite character, as he never really grows into anything better than that greedy stereotype. Then there's his wife Ruth, who I'll admit I actually liked. She seemed selfless and willing to help others, so she was one character that I didn't have a problem with. From there, we have Dante's business partner Melody, who came off to me as overly apologetic and a bit annoying. Melody did get better as the movie went on, but the amount of "this didn't feel right" and apologies for everyone else's behavior just kind of annoyed me. Tagging along with Melody was her sister Lila, who felt like the stereotypical rebellious kid. Like her sister, I did start to grow to like Lila more towards the end, and her backstory is extremely tragic. But she wouldn't listen to her sister, she fought with her over stupid things, and she just had this moody attitude for a good portion of the movie, so it took a while for her to start turning around. The last main character was named Richter, and he was the contractor hired to work on restoring the town for Dante and Melody. He played like the typical southern hillbilly, driving the lifted truck, creeping out the other characters as he skulked around, and even though he does have a selfless act throughout the movie, I feel like he really never shed that awkward, creepy hillbilly stereotype. So overall, I mean, the characters weren't terrible, and as actors they played their roles well enough. I just think they weren't given much to work with here. By the end of the movie, I really didn't have much of a connection with any of the characters, and I really didn't care about what happened to them, to be honest. The next thing I didn't like about the movie was its use of typical horror tropes. This is where the spoiler is, so you've been warned. There was a set piece that had a pool of water in it, and as soon as I saw this, I knew they were going to use this as a killer is dead fake out. It's one of the oldest tropes in the book. The killer is defeated and falls into the water, falls off a building, falls through something, and then suddenly rises for one final scare. It wouldn't bother me as much as the whole objective of the last act of this movie wasn't to kill Leatherface, as I knew right away he was going to fall into that water and then be alive. Another trope this movie used was the heroes don't immediately hightail it out of the dangerous area, but instead take a break and relax thinking it's over, just for the killer to attack one final time. Obviously not spoiling the ending, but at the end, the survivors think they have defeated Leatherface and open the sunroof to their car and drive away slowly, just for Leatherface to come out of nowhere and attack them. I think what really bothered me about all of this is that both of these tropes happen within 5 minutes of each other, so it was a tiring trope piled on top of another tiring trope. The next thing I didn't like about this movie was how stupid it could be at points. This is another common horror trope, but I feel like this movie amps up the stupidity to 11 with some of these characters. I mean, the bus driver alone is about the level of stupidity in your average horror movie. If this guy was either high on drugs or really tired, because he most certainly made some of the dumbest decisions I've ever seen in a movie. It was so bad, it was bordering on a bad horror comedy level of stupidity. I mean, this guy decides to get out of the bus without hesitation when it mysteriously stops moving, despite everyone screaming at him to keep the door closed. He also planned to let a kid off the bus, knowing that there's a dangerous situation going on outside of that bus. This guy was aggravatingly stupid, and he never wisens up even by his end. While talking about the bus scene, I want to also talk about the people on the bus. So recording Leatherface as he stood there didn't really surprise me, but seeing none of the people on that bus using the emergency exits to escape really did. So this bus might not have been a Volvo, but just using this as a basis, I would assume all buses have at least 2 emergency exits on the roof, as well as the specific emergency exit windows that people could break to escape the bus. While the bus segment was certainly memorable, I don't understand how none of the people on this bus could figure out that some of the windows are breakable or how to open the emergency exits on the roof. There were a few more scenes throughout this movie that had me shaking my head, but this whole section with the bus was just too much. So the final issue I had with Texas Chainsaw Massacre was its runtime. This had to be one of the shortest movies I've ever seen, not even running for over an hour and 15 minutes. It wouldn't have been a super big deal if parts didn't feel rushed, but there was very little build-up before Leatherface goes on his rampage since he starts killing roughly 15 minutes in, and then after the bus scene, there weren't many people left for him to kill. This movie felt as short as its runtime, so I feel like it definitely could have done with an extra 15 to 20 minutes of bluff, just to drag out a few parts and make the movie not feel so rushed. So overall, I feel like this movie flew silently in under the radar and will fly just as silently back out. While it was far from terrible, the lack of good characters, the short runtime, and stupid parts throughout this movie really brought this one down for me. I'm going to give this movie a very generous 6.5 out of 10 because I just really love this adaptation of Leatherface. Every scene he was in, he stole the show. It's just a shame the writers couldn't put the same level of creativity into the rest of the movie like they put into him. This movie was certainly entertaining, but I don't see myself going back to it again. I think it was just one of those once and done movies. If you rewatch a movie like this too many times, I feel like the issues like broken glass will begin to spider crack, ruining the movie more and more until its shortcomings overtake the good. This is definitely not the movie I would recommend signing up for Netflix over, but if you're a member and have about an hour to kill at any time, I'd recommend at least giving this movie a chance. I think it'll at least entertain you from start to finish. I'd recommend Texas Chainsaw Massacre to any fans of the horror genre, fans of the Texas Chainsaw franchise, or gore fiends. In an era of reboots and restarts, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre falls a little short compared to the other franchises doing this. It's clear this movie was inspired by some of the other reboots, but it never really commits to any of these ideas for very long, probably because it's just so short due to how fast the movie runs. But what did you think? Comment down below what you thought of the movie, and also comment your favorite horror movie icon. If you like this video, feel free to like it and subscribe. I'd love to have you on the journey. If you have some spare time, please check out a few of the other videos on my account. I'd really appreciate it. And until next time, have a great day.